Hi, one of this year's Oscar contenders that I was very excited to see is Todd Field's Tar, a story about a hugely successful and massively acclaimed composer conductor, Lydia Tarr, who is shortly to complete her cycle of recording orchestrations of Mahler's complete symphonies. However, things start to bubble up from the past. A former protege of hers commits suicide, and she has her assistant delete a series of emails showing that the woman was in some way angry or unbalanced and might have been accusing Tara of something. Slowly, her life starts to crumble as more and more things go wrong for her. She takes an interest in a new cellist joining the orchestra, which drags her away from her own wife and child. And slowly, everything starts to go wrong, and her perfectly constructed life begins to crumble. I found this to be an incredibly engaging film. Um, it has a subtlety and a nuance that I think is quite rare in a major film release. And it typifies the um, idea that I like in films where the audience is deemed to be the final component of making the film, the audience response and the audience's ability to fill in blanks, because a lot of the film is left oblique. You're given enough clues to work it out for yourself as you watch it, without having to think about it or puzzle it out after you leave the cinema. You can figure it out as you're watching it. But working out what's happening, why these things are happening, Tar's background, because she's much of the time a closed book, um, we start to find out exactly how much of her is real, how much is a front. She's a hugely successful person. She's an EGOT, meaning she's won an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. She's a hugely successful conductor in every field you can imagine, but she's still very much a person who is deeply flawed and deeply troubled. Cate Blanchett is fantastic in the major role. Um, you see Tar's life in her face. You see the mind, you see all the thought being filtered through her micro expressions. It's an incredibly controlled, nuanced performance for a controlled, nuanced character. The script I thought was superb. Todd Field hasn't made a film in 16 years. This is only his third feature after In the Bedroom and Little Children, both of which are excellent films. Um, but he's lost none of his sharpness. Um, it's it's just all round a very impressive piece of work. The use of sound, I was intrigued by. There is effectively no um, non-diegetic music. All the music featured in the film is within the scene itself. Um, so there are scenes of Tar conducting, scenes of her playing music herself. Cate Blanchett played the piano for the film. Um, she addresses her orchestra fluently in German and English, switching between the two. She is an extremely accomplished, intelligent person, but there is something there that pushes her further. There is something that is sending her in a direction away from the smart route. Um, but it's a very finely honed film. I mean, there are scenes where she was repeatedly shown exercising, going for a run out in the street, or uh, exercise in a gym. And sometimes when she's running through a park, we hear distant screams, and the sound mix is careful enough to suggest that what you're actually hearing is something bleeding through from the cinema next door. Maybe there's a horror film playing in there, and Tar turns and tries to listen. So it's actually within the film. This is fed back into the film itself, where she realizes when she's arranging some of the music that an opening trumpet piece isn't sounding right, and she realizes the way to make it work is to actually have the trumpet player completely off stage, entirely separate, so that the sound is much more distant, so that the sound is deliberately more removed. It's as though that idea is then bleeding into the production of the film itself, and that Field is taking ideas from his own creation. That Tar has a life of her own, which from which Field is mining inspiration. Um, but it's one of the best films of the year. I found it to be engaging, intriguing. It's one of those times where you can have a protagonist in a movie who isn't likable and yet is incredibly interesting. Much of it is really a character drama rather than the horror thriller that it's been confusingly promoted as. Um, it can be something of an ordeal. It's certainly not for everyone. I think the fact that it's about 2 hours and 40 minutes, it's lacking in a great deal of action. It's generally very talky. There are a lot of scenes with little or no dialogue, um, but it's very cinematic. It's using the image, it's using the sound, it's using every camera technique to tell the story of this woman's inner and outer life. And as a result, I found it fascinating and thrilling and absolutely terrific. And I recommend it very highly indeed.